Okay, so we're going to get this party started. As you notice, we have an entire panel of female subject matter experts in security. And so what I'd like to do is take a moment for each one of them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them so you can understand the context with which each one will be answering the questions driving the conversation. Let's start with Emily Miller.
Hi everybody, I'm Emily Miller. I'm the Director of National Security and Critical Infrastructure Programs with a company called Mocana. So, there we are. So our perspective is a little bit different than I think some of the other panelists on the panelists on the panel, the Redundant Office of Redundancy. We are a cybersecurity software company, but we are cybersecurity of the devices, not necessarily of the networks. So my perspective is all about how we make devices themselves secure, and I mean from the inside out. Now, my background, I came from the Department of Homeland Security, working for the Industrial Control System Cyber Emergency Response Team. So that CISA group over there at DHS, that was who I used to work for. And when I worked for DHS, I became convinced that we need to pay attention, in addition to traditional enterprise architecture, in addition to operational technology networks, we need to pay attention to the devices themselves and think about cybersecurity of the devices themselves. Because, as Tamara and I have talked before, and what's going to come out in my perspective on this panel, attackers, particularly nation states, are using networks, both enterprise networks and operational networks, to get to devices, to make them do what? To make them do things that they are not supposed to be doing, or not do things, and also to control or manipulate the data from those devices. Yep. So that's something that's going to come out as we talk here. So that is my perspective. Critical infrastructure, I used to work in all 16 critical sectors, so I have a expertise in a lot, but a deep expertise in none. So I can talk about a lot of things, but poorly. But that's really where my expertise is, and I'm really excited to be on this panel today and to learn from all of you.
Thank you, Emily. And next up, we have Joe Peterson. Joe, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tamara. I appreciate being here. I'm Joe Peterson. I am the Vice President of Cloud Services for Clarify 360. We are a boutique consultancy, and most of the companies that we work with are the holdings of private equity. So we go in as an outsourced IT ops team and review what they have in place. And what became abundantly clear to us, I've been in the cloud space for 9 years. I did data center before being in the cloud space, but what became abundantly clear to us is as companies change their footprint, they change their security posture. So that's not thought of ahead of time. It's often thought of as an oops moment after the fact at worst case. And we want to come in and say to them, let's plan for this. Let's think about how this is going to affect things for you once you change that footprint. So you'll see that as my perspective as we go through how the cloud is impacting security.
Excellent. Michelle, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tamara. I'm thrilled to be here today. And my name is Michelle Ruyle. I'm the CEO and founder of Optimized Channel. Optimized Channel helps emerging technology companies build indirect sales channels. So prior to starting my business a year ago, I was with IBM Cloud for the last 5 years and helped really launch IBM Cloud. So my perspective comes from working with partners and customers on digital transformation and what that looks like from an infrastructure as a service perspective, and of course security, which is all customers' number one concerns.
Excellent. And I am Tamara McCleary. I'm the CEO of Thulium. And Thulium works with, we have the pleasure of working with A10. And my background is science and technology, molecular physiology. So what's a molecular physiologist talking about security? Well, I would hope that we would all be very interested in how healthcare and research has security steeped and built in within it, because if you understand what's going on in medicine, it's absolutely critical that we have secure networks for patients and research and research institutions, and it goes on and on. So it's my pleasure to offer this panel up, and I'm going to ask these panelists some pretty tough questions, and we'll see how you guys respond to these. So Joe, I'm lopping one up to you first.
All right.
Because I know all of their backgrounds, so I figured you might have some insights for us here, but what's driving the growing investments in data security?
I think there's a lot of things, right? I think we sort of have a tipping point that's occurring right now. You've got a shortage of security skills in the marketplace, can't hire security professionals fast enough. You've got new rules that have gone into place, like GDPR, that is really affecting how we're allowed to communicate and what data we're allowed to transmit to one another. And then you've got cloud. Cloud, 2007 was the launch of AWS's first virtual machine, right? If you think about it. So in 10 years, we've had a dynamic change to infrastructure in every enterprise organization across the world, how they procure infrastructure. And that has changed how they approach security. So, I think those are some things, and there's some others as well, but I think those are maybe three of the things that are causing this holistic change and shift.
And, for you, Emily, what do you see? What are you forecasting within that investment in data security?
I think one of the things that's really interesting, you talked a little bit about this in your preamble, talking about digital transformation.
Right.
And I think if we have not already seen, we will see digital transformation and security really button heads, because we're advancing the technologies way faster than even we're able to keep up with from a security perspective. And you think about the development cycles, what does the user need? How is it going to be used? Does it do what I want it to do? Full stop. And then security turns into, oh, now that's a pain in the butt. I have to do that. I have to comply with what rules, and particularly in critical sectors where you have different elements of regulation. The transformations that we're talking about, the investments that we're making are running roughshod right into, well, now how do you make that secure? And again, how do you make your devices secure? And how do you make sure that data is secure? Headless
Right.
devices talking to the cloud where you're going to be analyzing the data. How do you know that thing is legit? So I think these are all considerations when you talk about growing investments in data, growing investments in data security, and digital transformation. That's going to run right into security. And particularly in industrial environments, also run into safety.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, is anything completely absolved of having to run into security? I mean, it's all meshed. I think the lines are blurred. Everything within our world now has a security component to it.
Absolutely.
So I love that you mentioned the digital transformation piece, because I think a lot of organizations are struggling with that right now, and it's absolutely critical, because if you were in the keynote session this morning, it's talking about trust. And once you've had that breach, once you've violated that trust, it's very difficult to reestablish that trust. So it's absolutely part and parcel all the way up through the stack to incorporate that security piece. So Michelle, you have another comment to that?
I was gonna say, because you were going right where what I was thinking. Don't you think consumers are driving this? Like, aren't we tired of, as consumers, forget security professionals, of having our stuff, parsed out everywhere? Like hearing about a breach here and a breach there and a breach here. And is that going to change our behavior as consumers? Who do we do business with?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you brought that up, is that at these conferences, everyone's here is involved in security in some way, but we're also consumers. And I think that actually organizations forget that, is that those that they're marketing to, if you're an enterprise and you're selling an enterprise solution, you're selling them to not another enterprise, you're selling them to people, consumers who have the same purchasing decisions and habits and emotions that any other human being has. So I think that's an absolutely critical consideration.
Yeah.
So Michelle, I didn't want to leave you out of this conversation, but I'm moving into more of your specialty zone. But shadow IT systems continue to proliferate, as do the number of applications and access points into systems, including legacy applications. Can you share a little bit more about your perspective?
Well, I'm speaking from talking to partners and companies, and frankly, shadow IT is out of control. That's what they say. And I think this is a systemic problem, and the larger the company, the more out of control shadow IT is. And so what that does is, while shadow IT affects all sizes of companies, the bigger the company, the more challenging it is. And what happens is with shadow IT and the onset of this, I'll call it the digital determination of companies. So there's digital transformation, but I call it digital determination. Every company is digitally determined today. And with that, they've empowered their employees to actually go and use credit cards and spin up public cloud instances. And this is a real problem for organizations. Recently, I had a conversation with a CISO from a large worldwide company. And they said that they have upware, and it's a highly branded company. The CISO said they have 1,400 instances on public cloud across their organization, a worldwide organization, and their concern is that shadow IT has gotten so out of control that they're worried that they're going to have a security breach and it's going to hurt their brand. And this whole thing about trust, and as consumers, we do have a choice on who we decide to give our data to. And there's lots of breaches out there where almost, it's kind of sad because we're almost like, well, where can I go to actually put my data and have it be secure? So shadow IT is a huge problem, and the bigger the company, the more challenging the perspective.
So let's go back to cloud security for a minute here. So Joe, I'll lop it up to you first, and then I'd love your input, Emily, on this one. But with cloud security, do the majority of organizations have good housekeeping deployed and enforced across their whole data estate in the cloud?
No, you just lobbed that up and you know the answer. It's a big.
Well, I know Joe, so I know this is a big thing.
No, right? So I read this interesting statistic that 40% of cloud purchases. Now they didn't say what kind of cloud, and cloud is sort of a ubiquitous term. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? Came from marketing, and that marketing maybe was telling IT that they'd done something in the cloud, and maybe they weren't telling them that they'd done something in the cloud. So imagine that for a minute. You've got all these marketing folks buying cloud, and it's hanging out there somewhere, right? And nobody's thought about the security around it. Do you see a problem? Because I see a problem. So I think it starts as we get more advanced. Cloud right now is a child, and it's moving into its adolescent years, right? We're version 2. We're getting into the teenage years here. What you're going to start seeing, I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion, is companies having policies around cloud procurement, right? Some strict rules and regulations that fall into place before you purchase cloud. Because every device or every application that touches your network is a potential for security breach. So what if you don't even know it's happening? Like if a bear in the woods, that whole sort of thing? I don't know. Okay. Over to you.
Oh, this is so perfect for you because Emily, you and I have had this conversation about, what's already there that we don't know yet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, again, I have a very different perspective. So we're talking a lot about security in the cloud, which we should be talking about, right? But, and again, I deal with critical infrastructure. We're talking about mission critical environments, so energy, power, water, healthcare, food and agriculture. What I get concerned about is, great, we're talking about security of stuff in the cloud. Awesome, as you should be. Why do you have it in the cloud in the first place? You're making decision points. You're transforming your environments to collect a buttload, and that is a technical term, a buttload of data to put into the cloud that then you're going to be using all this really cool big data analytics, AI, whatever. Great. How do you know that that data that you're making mission critical decisions on is legitimate? That it is from a trustworthy source? Because once it's in the cloud, you're going to use it. Mm-hmm. Back it up a little bit. What's the security chain? What's the chain of provenance of that data? And particularly when you're talking about headless industrial IoT. So not just IoT and not
That's right.
traditional control systems devices, both of which have their own different set of concerns, but industrial IoT, where you have a headless device maybe monitoring a thing or a process, talking to another headless device, talking to another headless device, talking to the cloud, where there it interfaces with a person or an AI. How do you assure that the data that now you're making decisions on is correct, particularly when those may be business critical or mission critical? So the security questions that we're talking about are not just user, identity, enterprise. They are, but they're also operational.
Yeah.
And everybody utilizes or has operational technology. And I guarantee you that your operation in your enterprise is going to be using operational data, whether that is your business or you are relying on, like Target, for example. The Target breach came through the HVAC system to the point of sale, which was insane. But that was also, 4 years ago now?
Mm-hmm.
Think about where the technology may be going.
Right. And then we just open the world up to 5G.
Bingo. Right. So, anyways, roundabout way of saying that we need to broaden our minds in the C-suite about the entire ecosystem of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Before we move on to a conversation that we've had around ransomware, did you have anything else to add to that, Joe?
Oh, yeah. I feel like it's my job as a consultant when I have a cloud conversation with a client, and we in fact developed one internally. We have a RSA document, and we put it in front of the customer because we'll say to them, we'll load it up. We'll be like, so who's responsible for cloud security? And they're like, the cloud provider. And we're like, no. And we put the RSA document in front of them and we go, listen, they're in the cloud and you're before the cloud. And so you can't just turn the keys of the car over to them and expect them to Uber you somewhere. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, you have to, where are your internal guardrails? Like, where are they? Anyhow.
Oh, I love that. You two are cracking me up. All right, so we had a really hot conversation around ransomware, so I had to lop this over to you, and then please feel free to jump in on either one of these. But so Emily, would you say that ransomware, crypto mining, banking Trojans, and VPN filters are some of the key malware challenges that continue to threaten businesses and consumers?
Right.
Would you add anything to this list that I've omitted?
So we're falling into the anything on this list that you've omitted. So when I was working at Homeland, when we would go give presentations and we do either the classified briefings or the non-classified briefings, everybody go, but really, what's the sexiest vulnerability that you've seen? We said, well, it's not, sure, there's malware, there's vulnerabilities, we're going to talk to you about them and how to mitigate against them, but we're not really concerned about that. We're concerned about the exploit. Why do we care about a vulnerability? Because we care about the exploit that it is causing, the problem and the root cause that thing, that malware, that whatever. I mean, VPN filter is another really interesting one. I'm going to tangent for a second because you look at what VPN filter was actually doing. It was a repeat persistent piece on routers, potentially by the Russians, right? Well, that looked like a big old testing ground to me on creating a persistent piece of malware. Why? What are they trying to do? What do they want to cause? Mm-hmm. So when we focus on, I mean, we need to, because we have to mitigate a lot of things, right? But when we focus on to the exclusion of the root cause and the root cause analysis and what people are actually after, when you focus on patching vulnerabilities, patch, constantly chasing malware, attacking the malware, focusing on the threat actor, that's all important. But what are they really trying to get after? What pain are we trying to solve that we're worried about vulnerabilities and malware? Those are the things that we really need to kind of take the layer back. And I think, I've seen it happen. I've been a part of it, unfortunately, where you're in that super reactive mode of, oh my God, here's this crazy new scary thing that I need to worry about, and what do I have in place, and how do I address this, and Petya, not Petya, VPN filter, what's coming next? You're you already know what's coming next. They're after your data.
That's right.
They're after your devices. They're trying to make you make bad decisions. Who cares what the malware piece is in your business? The government cares. The super majors care because they can feed lots of really cool data back to the government. Intelligence cares because they want to figure out what the threat actors are doing. But why do we, as business providers, care? Because we care about the impact.
Right.
Stop the impact and focus there.
That's good.
That's like a mic drop. Bam.
Yeah, that's good.
Joe,
No, I was just agreeing. That's good.
it's very good.
You know, I worked in the healthcare space for a couple of years when I was over at IBM. And what's really interesting is when you look at just this whole discussion around malware and all this stuff, you know, this has been out there for a while, and there's industries like the financial services industry that's a lot more mature at dealing with these kind of things. But then you get into the healthcare industry, and you see how vulnerable the healthcare industry is, because the end result is they're after that piece of data, which is your electronic health record that has all these important pieces, and it's actually on the black market the most, you get like, I think it's like $500 for electronic healthcare record because it has your driver's license and your social security and all these piece parts. And when I was in the healthcare space working with the biggest electronic health record companies out there in the market, they're all, because they're so digitally determined to get into the cloud, these kind of things about protecting that data, it was important, but they didn't, some of the companies understood the real risk to what was happening, like what was going on here, but it was all about IT talking about the bits and bytes and how we're going to protect this, but they weren't actually thinking like how, like they're putting data on cloud that's actually not encrypted. And I'm like, okay, and not only just data sitting in storage on the cloud, not encrypted, but actually the encryption, getting it in and out of there. It's fascinating to me that the healthcare space is, I think, the most vulnerable to these type of things because the data is so critical, and they're just not, they're maturing, but they're kind of a lot further behind than the financial services industry.
I think we're a lot further behind. I think that healthcare is not only farther behind, but I think that we are years behind in even understanding the implications.
That's right.
For not catching up to where the financial service industry is. And it should scare all of us. Unless
Yep.
all of you have never ever seen a physician and you don't have a health record, it should scare all of us that this data is sitting up in the cloud unencrypted.
Yep.
And
And
accessible to
transferred
everything.
back and forth.
Yes.
I won't even give them my driver's license when they ask me when I go to the doctor. I'm like, what do
They
you need my
already have
driver's
it. Don't worry
license
about
for?
it. It's on
I'm
the
like,
black
here
market.
I am, but I don't want this in my record because it's just another piece of information that is hackable, and anyhow, it's I care as a consumer, right? It's my
Wait,
data.
you mean giving the last four of your social isn't a great stop method for making sure that it's you? Come on.
I know.
It just kills me every single time. I need the last four of your social. Why? Everybody has it.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a shift in attack vectors from the network to the user. How will this shift drive cyber hygiene growth?
All right. So again, this is, I feel like I'm a broken record at this point. Sorry, guys. When we got these questions kind of looking in advance, I was making sure Tamara knew that I'm coming at this from a bit of a different perspective. So I want to make sure that everybody knows we're not just worried about the user. The user is exceptionally important for all the reasons we're highlighting here. The attackers are also intentionally attacking the devices that do your business. And I don't necessarily mean the enabling functions for finance, for marketing, or for what holds your IP, because that's exceptionally important. But when you are a creator of goods and services, or when you are a creator of a process, or you have an industrial aspect, or gosh, food and ag, I keep talking about this, combines are now, automated and connected to potentially a mobile device that controls it. You're talking about process controls, not necessarily in a traditional process control environment. And what we've seen, if you look at the last, suite of really crazy things that are coming out in the electric sector of the intentional targeting, of the electric grid, when you look at the intentional targeting across transportation of what they're doing, these actors are coming through your network. They're pinpointing and jumping through third party, finding the weakest vulnerable thing. And some of them are after your data. Some of them want that public health information. Some of them want all your security clearance information. Thank you, China. But others are trying to, and that's great. That's great. Now, what I'm trying to get down to the safety controller. So I know you guys have heard of the Triconics attack, where there was a safety controller device that was impacted. It had bad code, and it flipped the device, and the device did what it was supposed to do. But the actor had reverse engineered this safety controller to understand how the damn thing worked. So they could do what? The only reason to go after a safety controller device, which is the stopgap of when things go south in a process, we have a safety device to stop a chemical release, to stop an overflow, to pick your poison and what that is. The only reason why an actor would go after that is to cause bad things, for either it to tell what's up the chain that everything's fine when it's not, or to make it fail. This is what we're talking about. It impacts users, but in a different way. This impacts real lives, either from a process blowing up or from a dependency coming down the chain. And when we think about that, and I keep harping on it because I think as in InfoSec we get lost in the conversations of the day-to-day business and protecting. There's a lot to protect. But when you laser focus in on this is about the lives and then the economic cost associated with that business, and I mean business impact is in the process, right? When you laser focus on that, that makes it really easy to make your risk decisions. And I think we are doing a disservice at the C-suite level by, lumping IT in with like your physical plant folks and just saying, well, that's some other crap that I have to deal with. It gets in my way. It's a pain in my butt. They're stopping me. They're saying no. They're also protecting your butts.
That's right. Yeah.
Joe?
I mean, after that, I got nothing.
That is a hard one to follow.
What did I tell you, Tamara? You are amazing.
It has no, not at all. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we opened up this entire conference with the fact that it's about really authentically communicating what our true issues are, what those problems are, what our pain points are. And what I appreciate about what you're saying is you're giving us the unvarnished truth. And this is a really big consideration that we have to think about. So I've got plenty of questions. Trust me, I have no end to questions I could ask you guys. But so, Joe, how about IT technology is being increasingly deployed by many organizations with minimal thought by many as to the security risks and potential consequences? Name 2 things that organizations can do to secure their Internet of Things devices.
Oh, that's easy. So I'm not going to tell you how many years ago I became an engineer. But when I did, one of the things they taught us was keep it simple, right? And I think they added another S on the end, especially for our group, keep it simple, stupid. So there was that too. But one of the things you learn is let's go back to the basics and let's set the table, right? And what I mean by that is let's stop and let's take an inventory of what we have on the IoT network. And then let's think a minute and go, should Susie Q's iPad be on my IoT network? That'd be no. So let's talk about what we have as a baseline and then who should not be allowed on there. And we're going to have a whole plethora of things, I guarantee you, that are sitting on our network that should not be on our network. Think about your network at home. As a consumer, Wi-Fi is what enables your IoT, right? So I set up a VLAN at home because I had all these weird things coming onto my network at home. I'm like, who is that? Lazy boy down the street. No, lazy boy down the street. It should not be on my network right now. So just think about that. That's a microcosm of what's happening from a macrocosm standpoint.
You know, it's interesting you say that, but just to bring it on down home to just our everyday lives, how many of you have kids? All right, and so these devices, you can, I mean, every device now being connected, you can buy off Amazon and it comes delivered to your door. My husband and I had no idea that our son had bought one of those little cameras, and he connected it into the house, and he gave his friends the access code so they could talk to one another.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize the camera was in the house. Well, I really don't need eyeballs looking in, and sometimes when no one's home, I may not be appropriately dressed to be walking around. I had no idea this camera was there, and it was open.
Tamara's the naked neighbor.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm the bad naked neighbor. That's right. So, but this is the reality come down home,
That's
right?
right.
Just to the granular level. But when we talk about all of these billions of connected devices, these are real things. I know you've got something to say about this.
Yeah.
This is your sweet spot.
There's a really interesting standard called IEC 62443-3. The IEC standard is huge. I haven't read all of it, but I've read 3-3. What you can do as a business is ask your OEMs, put it in your procurement language to say, I want, there's a suite of stuff, and you can say, I want, at least this type of security. I want a root of trust, I want encryption, and I forget what the rest of the stack is, but I should know it. I just outed myself here. But anyways, you have a baseline of security. Now, 62443 security level 2 is against low-level attackers using easy stuff. So it's not your nation-state attacker. We're not even at security level 2 in devices. Right? So just put it in spec. And if you're not doing the whole suite of things, maybe let's start with, do you have a root of trust? Pick your poison on what you want that to be based on the level of trust that you need. It can be hardware or firmware based, right? Encryption. Yes. Make sure you have that. But spec it in, because you as a business, I hear a lot from owner operators, well, I rely on my vendor, and my vendor's going to tell me. I'm like, aren't you purchasing? Doesn't the vendor rely on you? And yes, there's a symbiotic relationship there, but certainly you can start to implement and add procurement language that maps to industry best practices and standards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Michelle, I'm going to lap one at you because you've been quiet for a while.
Bring
So
it.
you don't get to get out of this. So in the past, cybersecurity was not on the board's radar, right? Why has cybersecurity become a major topic for the boardroom?
I think a lot of us would say that when you think about boards, and of course the bigger the company, the more challenging this is, but our boards that oversee our larger companies, and maybe even smaller ones, they're not actually cyber savvy, right? And they don't actually look at board members and go, oh, I want to bring this person on because of their cyber savviness. I think that what's happening today is there's the New York State, New York Rule 500 is actually changing, bringing awareness to the board for cybersecurity. So it actually launched on March 1st, and it now requires for all financial institutions running any data, financial data through New York, could be an insurance company or financial services company, but now there's actually, the board is required to sign off and put together and signature that they have validated their cybersecurity policy, and not so an end-to-end policy starting from the very beginning of the plan and actually the testing of the plan, and then what happens if there is a breach. So now, if you are a financial services institution and you are on a board, you not only have to sign off on that as a board member, but you're actually fiscally and legally responsible for if something actually happens with a breach. This takes, besides what we were talking about earlier when you were talking about the brand and trust of consumers, so I actually think that started with all these breaches with Target and Anthem and Macy's. I think it started getting into the boardroom, this whole cyber discussion, because of the impact on brand. right? But now you've got this New York Rule 500, which actually takes it to another level. So it's moved beyond brand, and now it's actually at a fiscally responsible level and possibly jail time. That's a game changer. And actually, you're also seeing the same thing with GDPR in the EU, right? A very similar concept. It's not as strict on how it impacts board members, and it doesn't require a board member sign off, but it is, you're starting to see that actual legislation is getting down into the boardroom and making them responsible.
I think that's really interesting as well, and particularly in fintech, that because there's such a direct correlation between a cyber impact and an economic loss.
That's right.
And a large-scale economic loss,
That's right.
because fintech is controlling, the entire
That's right.
monetary value of the entire United States and every single person in the United States, right? So how do we get that across to other industries that it may not be so one-to-one? So we brought up healthcare, because healthcare is interesting, because yes, there is an economic cost, because healthcare is also a business.
That's right.
And there is also from the clinician perspective as well, the safety impact too.
That's right.
And I feel like there is something is circling around, and how do we change that conversation at the board where it's so clear in financial and maybe a little more fuzzy in other areas, making that direct. My personal passion is all about lives, and it was a shock to me coming out of the government, as naive as I am, like, raise the American flag and everybody cares about lives, and people looked at me and said, right, but how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah.
Well, oh, okay. But from a board perspective, what's the monetary loss? What's the economic impact? How do you tie that into lives and safety, which you really should care about? If they're an OSHA violation, are there other rules and regulations that you're going to run afoul of? And how do we, as influencers in that conversation, help educate board members that cyber is not just your email? It's actually a whole interconnected network.
Yeah.
And I mean network, not network, whatever. You guys know what I mean.
Well, I think it starts with what's happened with the New York Rule 500, right? It starts with an industry like financial services who's been fighting cybersecurity for many more years than healthcare, transportation, or these other kind of non-targeted industries.
Right.
And it starts with legislation that really impacts the board and makes them responsible. And that then will filter down, I believe, into like industries like healthcare. They care about lives, they care about people, right? But now, if they have a financial responsibility and they have maybe a possibly jail time responsibility, they care a little bit more about that data and what happens to it. And cybersecurity becomes, a personal impact on a board member. So that's what the New York Rule 500 does. It makes a board member financially responsible for that. And I think that's where it comes down to. And frankly, that's going to be, March 1st it went into place. So it's brand new, and it's really going to be, I think, the industry trendsetter of what happens in other industries going forward and how that impacts the board.
Wow. I just think of the ramifications becoming that personal. It's definitely going to make some changes. Joe, do you have any comments on that?
I think that's really important, and that's really good. I have a customer in Puerto Rico, and they're the Medicare of Puerto Rico. And what's interesting is the carrot stick approach, right? So you can hit somebody over the head with a penalty, or you can do what the government did with Medicare, and that's incentivize them to be secure. So they have a star rating system.
I like that.
Right? The carrot stick, right? They have a star rating system, and I've learned this with them being a client of mine, 1 through 5 stars. And the government has tied money to the stars. So if you get a 3-star, you get less money than if you get a 4-star, right? And if you get a 4-star, that gives you extra money to attract extra people to your plan. They have really sort of turned that around and made everybody that's part of this program want more money from the government. So I think that's a really interesting way to approach it.
I love that because you're tying a token economy, which I've used with my kids quite successfully, into security, which is absolutely phenomenal. I want to shift us into artificial intelligence. You guys know that's what I'm really wildly passionate about, and I think that takes security to a whole new level, and it's up-leveling it. But how will cybersecurity defenders use artificial intelligence to counter attacks and identify vulnerabilities in 2019? And I have a second piece to this. What are you seeing from a vendor perspective coming into focus?
I'm going to punt because I've talked a lot.
Oh, well, you go.
Well, I think artificial intelligence is a game changer, and it's actually, I can't remember who said it, but it was something like every piece of software, I think by like 2035 is going to have some component of AI, right? So you're going to have artificial intelligence in every kind of piece of software doing something. So I think that what's interesting is when you look at security and using artificial intelligence technologies to attack companies, I think it's a serious threat that we have to pay attention to, and I don't think we're actually ready for using technology like that to come at us. I don't think we're barely ready to handle hackers coming at us without using these type of technologies to get there. And I think it's a serious problem that we have to look at. I don't think there's a solution right now that accurately solves it.
Joe?
You know, I took a different take on this question, and I thought about it from a market perspective. And I thought the companies that are putting AI and machine learning into their security platforms are the ones that are using that technology to win business, right? They definitely are. So I look at maybe even the SEMs that are out in the marketplace today. And the ones that can tout that they have this ability and capabilities are winning more business than the guys that haven't baked it in yet. So it's sort of a race to get, you know, can I get this technology in? Because clearly it matters. Take aside the gain to the company. Just look at it today as a differentiator in your product.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. Emily?
Part of the reason why I punted is I remain unconvinced.
Tell us more about your unconvinced nature.
Now, it's not that I'm unconvinced with AI writ large. I mean, we know that it is transformative, and it's only going to increase from here. But I'm not sure that AI solves the problem. I think AI, to your point, is a convenient marketing piece. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not good happening. It doesn't mean that there's not value being drawn from that. It does mean that from what I have seen in the marketplace, we allow the conversations of, well, I have AI, and I have deep learning analytics, pick your marketing buzzword bingo, right? And then you wave the IT magic, and then somebody says, but I have those, so I'm secure.
Right.
And the conversation kind of stops.
Right.
And that troubles me. Because this is not a one and done. And I think that's part of the reason why it is so easy to land on, oh, I've got AI, and I've got deep learning, and I've got analytics, and I've got big data, and I've got cloud. All the buzzwords.
All the buzzwords, yeah.
But you haven't actually tackled the holistic perspective.
Yeah.
And it's identify what you got. Pick what network are you concerned about? Enterprise, are you concerned about operational? Are you concerned about your IoT, whatever? And identify what you got. And it doesn't necessarily need to be. There's great vendors who are here who are doing awesome, identification stuff. But you can also, from an operational perspective, talk to your operators and say, what are the top 5 things that are going to cause me to have a really bad day? Let's start there. Number 1, is AI going to do that for you? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? So, looking at this gigantic ecosystem of cybersecurity that you have the devices, you have the networks, you have the users, you have the regulatory bodies, you have the C-suite. really being able to just in a quick, practical way decompose what that is and pick your pain. And your pain is based on what's going to cause you to have a bad day. Bad day being loss of life. Bad day being your IP walking out the door, your health information walking out the door, and or a serious economic impact because your main, machine thing that's supposed to be doing the thing every day is now offline. And by the way, that thing made you $10 million every hour. AI does not solve that problem.
No.
Joe, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm just agreeing with her. I look at every technology that comes into the marketplace evolves.
Yeah.
Right? And today we're enamored with the idea of AI. But how much impact is it really having economically for us today? How much is it really doing? But will it get there? Will it grow up like cloud has? Yeah. So I'm hopeful for it.
So I'm going to switch gears for a minute into legislation, if you guys are game for a little legislative question. So how will growing security and privacy concerns drive increased legislative and regulatory activity? Do you want to hit that first, Michelle?
Yeah, actually, we talked about that when we were talking about how the board is impacted. But I'm encouraged because I think when you start to hit the board and you start to create legislation that really impacts people taking responsibility for cybersecurity, which is what's happening with the New York Rule 500, it starts to funnel down. So I absolutely think we're going to see legislation in healthcare space around this, right? We've got this model. It's, a couple days ago it went live, so they're going to give a little bit of time for it. We have GDPR in Europe, right? Another very centrally focused on the data, the piece behind it, what happens to protect that. So we're already seeing that legislation here today. I'm very hopeful that those are the kind of things that are going to take us to the next level and are going to start to see things that are very similar around other industries where data is what people are going after and what you need to protect it. And so I think healthcare is actually next.
Joe?
It's interesting to me that the law doesn't ever seem to keep up with technology. The law always sort of falls behind technology. And I think until we get GDPR, like it, not like it, wherever you are on the spectrum, until we get a national perspective around rules and regulations. I mean, some states have it, and that's, by the way, that's the only reason we hear about breaches, is like the state of California mandates that you have to tell that there's been a breach. Otherwise, we'd never know. We would never know. So, I say that, hats off and hand claps to laws that make us all more aware as consumers of what's happening behind the scenes.
Emily?
It's a really interesting question.
I mean, you coming from the government and the government perspective, I thought this might be a little juicy to hear from you.
It is juicy. I mean, what I find, both of you raise such incredible points. Joe with the legislative process is so long. Even regulation making at the individual agency level takes for frickin' ever, right? So by the time you get something either at an agency regulation or some sort of legislative process through, it's basic bare bones and also 5 years too late, right?
That's right.
Or it's your baseline, and the industry scrambles to meet the baseline, and then you just kind of stop, or like half of them stop and half move ahead, whatever. It's really tricky to balance standards, best practices, regulation, which private industry does not like at all, which also lags behind on the tech side, with legislation, which then you're trying to educate Congress about what's that big TV monitor screen thingy. That's actually your computer. Thank you very much. Trying to get folks to the right level of how do we balance, adding some sort of regulation and some sort of legislation onto tech. And then for me, onto industrial tech, which is another level of education. I don't know that, yes, we need to keep driving towards some sort of regulation, some sort of legislation, but I think, Michelle, to your point, I really think it's going to be the economics and it's going to be insurance that are probably going to end up driving this, because we are all used to having some level of insurance requirements, some sort of the board. I mean, this New York thing you're talking about is fascinating. I'm going to go research it as soon as we're done here because, there's something there about the economic care and the duty to care, and there's certainly, as safety is kind of coming more to the fore, but safety, people think that's the industrial environment, and it's not going to have my business impact other than OSHA fines and that sort of thing. So what are the practices that are going to be driving that we interact with on a day-to-day basis that aren't lagging, 5 to 10 years behind in how they approach the security question? And I think, the economics piece, having the financial impact and the financial loss impact, and that also tying into cyber insurance, and particularly as cyber insurance and the insurance agencies themselves become more cyber savvy. And I actually was just having a conversation last week with a company that I was learning from, and he was talking about the cyber risk and helping the insurance companies that they work with define cyber peril, and based on quantifying actual cyber risk that is not necessarily the business impact, because we were talking your simpatico on your impact is actually the business of the goods and services that you're providing, tying that what's now seen as like the bottom depths of your industrial process to you're going to have a real problem here, folks, because your insurance, you didn't do the things that your insurance company told you needed to be doing, and now that cyber peril is not covered because you actually left your devices wide open and your operational networks exposed because you didn't look at your architecture or whatever they decide it's going to be. I think that there's something there that's going to converge to surpass where we are legislatively and where we are in the regulatory regime, while government agencies are working on, putting in place things that will push the market. The FDA is a really good example. They've got some pre-market guidance out for medical devices that I think the comment period is closing fairly soon. But that's to push medical device manufacturers towards cybersecurity because it is within FDA's purview to make sure there is not a safety impact. And that's really exciting. But while that moves along and the business C-suite heads are going, that's great, but money, money, money. How do you tie all those pieces together?
All right, so I have one last question for this panel, and this is a question none of you got. So, it's only fair because this question, I don't know if you were in the keynote earlier today, but all of these conversations really have most to do with that human impact, right? And the human impact being that we have to look at our future and what kind of future are we co-creating together. And this one has to do with the fact that each of you should be able to answer this just being a human being on this planet. So how many of you know that only 12% of engineers are women? Just 12. Did you know that? Is that shocking? Huh? You thought it was lower. Oh, it's getting
You're
lower.
shocked it's so
You're right.
high.
It's actually going down, not up. So one of these questions I have for you is that, we have 12% of engineers being women, but initiatives, there's an initiative called Coding Her Future. You got to check this out. Coding Her Future is an initiative, but they're working to try to change that statistic because, like I said, it's not going up, it's going down. What are your ideas for bridging the gender gap for women in STEM and STEAM? I like to include art in there too. Professions.
Yeah, I'll start. So my son is a STEM kid, and so and he's in high school and he's doing all this stuff and he's going to be doing STEM for college and AI and robotics, and he's super into it. So while he's not a female, he's a male, so I'm very immersed in the whole STEM side of the house, and and I also am a board member and on Cloud Girls and helped start Cloud Girls 8 years ago. And we do a lot of stuff with girls that code. I actually think how we solve this problem is we start young. And that's actually the philosophy of Girls Who Code. They really start with girls at a very young age to get them to be interested in saying that a STEM career is something that they can do. I think we have a lot of societal norms as women that we're supposed to be and act a certain way, and we get taught those at a very young age. And so I think if we really focus on young girls and say it's okay to be smart, it's okay to talk, it's okay to have a voice and not just sit there and be pretty. And honestly, there's a lot of men out here in our audience, but as a woman, I'm sharing with you kind of as I grew up as a young girl. It's like you weren't supposed to talk, you were just supposed to sit there and look pretty. And I think today, if we actually help our young girls say, it's okay to have an opinion, it's okay to do this. And actually, I think we have a challenge because mathematically, a lot of young girls aren't stimulated by what STEM has to offer, which is a lot of math and science. And I'm actually a science person. So I was pre-med major. I didn't go on to be a doctor, but I went on to do technology, right? So I think that it really starts at a young age. It's us as a society really supporting young girls and saying it's okay to think differently. And also, there was another statistic about young girls think like they could take a test and do things and show their scientific candor, but they're afraid to actually vocalize it. So we have to give them the permission to vocalize it. Those are my thoughts.
Well, you know what's interesting is that what she's saying is I think it's not been that long, and we forget that there's been a lot of changes, but they haven't been that long in coming.
Yeah.
And in 1987, my undergraduate degree is a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. So I'm a trauma life flight helicopter nurse by training before I went into research as a molecular physiologist. And what was interesting is when I graduated in 87, I was told after a 12-hour-long night shift that when the doctors came on to give them my seat and offer them a coffee. But I was busy trying to take care of critically ill patients. And when I went to apply for another job and I was interviewed, the head nurse said, I was told by the doctors that I am to hire new attractive nurses. Like, it's not that long ago, you guys, right? So yeah. I think it's real, and I think it's really hard as a culture for someone not within that culture to kind of see what that is like. But I think these are the things that we have to look at is how are we, even as women, how are we perpetuating that? Because I think there's been a lot of men who've been so supportive and uplifting and have gotten me to the place that I am. And I often sometimes think the biggest struggles with other women. And that I think it's all of us together. Yeah. It's not gender specific. It's whether you're male or female, or you identify as a male or you identify as a female. It's all of us together being able to see everyone as equal and giving equal opportunity to our young women, so we don't raise them with the same struggles that we grew up with. Joe?
Oh, I'm going to give you an answer that you won't expect.
Okay, love it. I love being unexpectedly delighted and surprised.
I'm going to tell you, show me the money. And what I mean by that is, and I'll tell you why, and then I'll tell you my story about it. So I could sit here and talk about discrimination and blah, blah, blah. I've been an engineer a long time. I was the only female in the room, boys.
You know all the notes.
Only female. So we're not even spend money on that. We're going to talk about the economic reasons why you want to be in technology. It's one of the best paying fields. It doesn't matter your gender. If you look at the list of the top 10 paying jobs in America, sometimes technology is right up there with physicians and lawyers. It really is, kids. You all know that secret. So when my daughter was in high school, Cisco came up and they said, I was studying for my CCNA when my daughter was in high school. I won't tell you what year that was. And Cisco had a program where if the juniors in high school went into the CCNA program, they could be guaranteed that they got their CCNA in 2 years, right? So their junior and their senior year. So Cisco stepped up. And you started seeing organizations actively recruiting women by teaching them early that they could get a certification. So my daughter walks out of high school with her CCNA, and she had job offers out of high school for $100,000. Not an ounce of college. Now, she decided to go on to college and got a graphic design degree, but she literally had an offer for $100,000 to go be a network engineer somewhere out of high school. So I would tell them, see, they don't know. And if you just say to them, look, you have a chance to earn a really good living in your lifetime doing something. Does that sound interesting to you? Maybe all the other stuff follows along with that. That's my answer.
I'm going to have you speak to my son, Joe, because he wants to be in retail, and I want you to talk to him. Don't go there. Emily, what do you think?
I love what both of you have said. And I wholeheartedly agree. And there is something to be said for those of us who are motivated, and I suck at math, like hardcore suck at math. But I'm a really good critical thinker. And so things like, the only thing I didn't suck at was geometry, because it was all language and proof, so
I was
could
awful.
really talk my way through that. There's something to be said for opening up STEM, and in particularly this field, because there are hard sciences where you have to follow a hard science path, like just full stop. But particularly in cybersecurity and InfoSec, difference of opinion, a difference of background, a difference of nationality and race, ethnicity, all of that, and education creates a richness that we lack when it is computer science, engineering, go through this thing, find this way, get your CISSP, and you'll do this thing, all of which are great.
Right.
There are normalized pathways for getting here.
Yep.
I didn't follow that myself. I got my master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution. I was going to study sexual violence in post-conflict countries. You know why I'm here? Because what I do makes a difference. What we do makes a difference. And it is the challenges we have before us excite me on a day-to-day basis, because this is really hard stuff to noodle over. And talking to women like you just is like, oh my God, we have so much before us that we can actually tackle. And what I want to do is bring women and people up who think differently than I do to look at this perspective and say, how can I change this? Get out of the group think. And what might we be missing? What might I be missing? And, you know, everything that both of you said is the right answer.
Right. Yeah.
And. So, and the and is, we need to make these career fields attractive to people who may have a music degree. I mean, the poor, you know, the woman who was the CISO of Equifax or whatever it was the music major, and she just got raked over the coals. Because her background was music. Now, you know, irrespective of the whole music disaster, it might have been her fault anyways, but, you know, the fact that she had a music degree should not have been the central point of, well, she shouldn't be here.
Well, I think that's the STEAM part, right?
Yes.
The arts part. And just to wrap up, and thank you guys all for your being willing to be so authentic and open and transparent, is that really all it is that we're perpetual learners. None of us can future cast accurately, but it's going to take our human creativity and our ability to think beyond what we think we know, and instead explore the unknown and be open to that. And that is STEAM: science, technology, engineering, arts. I mean, it's the whole package, which I think you've defined. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This has been fantastic. Thank you for paying attention and for listening and supporting us.
Thank
and
you.
if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be sitting here.
That's
so
right.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily, Joe, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Tamara.
much.